The fluorescent lights in Marcus Chen's basement laboratory hummed their usual monotone symphony at 2:47 a.m., casting sterile white across decades of accumulated research. He sat motionless at his workstation, staring at the patent application on his screen. 23 pages that represented 7 years of his life, compressed into legal terminology and technical diagrams. His reflection in the darkened window showed a man who'd aged beyond his 38 years, with premature silver threading through his black hair and circles under his eyes that no amount of sleep could cure. The email from Richard Pemberton still glowed on his secondary monitor, each word a small violence. Marcus, we need to discuss your compensation package. $130K is substantially above market rate for your position. Effective next quarter, we'll be adjusting your salary to $95K to better reflect industry standards. This is non-negotiable. The decision comes from the board. Best, RP. Marcus had read it 17 times since it arrived at 6:32 p.m. yesterday. Each reading made his hands shake a little more. $130K wasn't above market rate. It was below it for someone with his credentials. He held 2 PhDs, one in materials engineering and another in quantum physics. He'd published 47 peer-reviewed papers. He'd been at NovaTech Industries for 12 years, since he was 26, working 60-hour weeks minimum, spending more time in this lab than in his own apartment. The real knife twist was the phrase, "better reflect industry standards." Marcus knew exactly what that meant. 6 months ago, they'd hired Jennifer Carlson as Senior Vice President of Innovation, a white woman with an MBA and no technical background at $340K plus stock options. Last month, they'd brought in Derek Walsh, fresh out of Stanford with a bachelor's degree at $115K as a junior researcher. Marcus trained Derek. Marcus supervised Derek. Marcus corrected Derek's mistakes daily. But Marcus was too expensive. He stood up, his knees cracking from hours of sitting, and walked to the far wall where his prototype sat under a protective cloth. He pulled the fabric away slowly, revealing what looked like an ordinary sheet of flexible material, midnight blue with a faint iridescence when light hit it at certain angles. To an untrained eye, it was nothing special. To Marcus, it was everything. The material was a breakthrough in metamaterial design, a quantum-engineered fabric that could absorb and redirect electromagnetic radiation across virtually the entire spectrum. It made things invisible not just to sight, but to radar, infrared thermal imaging, even certain types of particle detection. The military applications alone were worth billions. The civilian applications, medical imaging, telecommunications, privacy technology were worth billions more. He'd invented it here, in NovaTech's lab, on NovaTech's time, using NovaTech's equipment. According to his employment contract, that made it NovaTech's property. The contract he'd signed at 26, desperate for his first real job, not understanding what he was giving away. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from his sister Linda. "Did you talk to a lawyer yet?" He hadn't. He'd been too ashamed to tell anyone except Linda about the pay cut. She was a paralegal, practical and fierce, and she'd immediately said he should seek legal counsel. But lawyers cost money, and after 12 years of student loan payments and supporting her mother through her illness 3 years ago, Marcus didn't have much saved. The pay cut would make things even tighter. Marcus's phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from Wei Zhang, his only real friend at NovaTech. "Dude, did you hear? Pemberton just bought a 3rd vacation home. Saw it on his Instagram. Aspen, $4.2 million. Meanwhile, we can't get budget approval for new oscilloscopes." Marcus set the phone down and returned to his computer. He pulled up his employment contract, reading through it with fresh eyes. There it was. Section 7.3. All inventions, discoveries, improvements, and innovations conceived, developed, or reduced to practice by employee during the term of employment shall be the sole and exclusive property of employer. But there was something else. something he'd noticed years ago but never thought about seriously. Section 7.3b. Notwithstanding the foregoing, inventions conceived entirely outside of working hours, without use of employers' resources, facilities, or confidential information, and wholly unrelated to employers' current or reasonably anticipated business, shall remain the property of employee. Marcus looked at his prototype again. He'd built this specific version, the one that actually worked, at home. The lab version, the one in NovaTech's facility upstairs, was deliberately incomplete. It was missing the crucial element, the specific quantum alignment process that he'd figured out at 3 a.m. in his apartment 6 months ago, using equipment he'd bought with his own money from eBay and surplus scientific supply houses. The NovaTech version could bend light. Interesting, but not revolutionary. A dozen other labs had achieved similar results. The home version, the one in front of him now, could bend reality. He'd kept them separate on purpose, some instinct telling him to hold something back. Maybe he'd sensed this moment coming. Maybe he'd just been cautious after watching NovaTech patent 17 other innovations from their researchers, making billions while the inventors got nothing but their salaries that were, apparently, too high. Marcus opened a new document and began typing. Not a patent application this time, a resignation letter. Dear Richard, thank you for your email regarding my compensation adjustment. After careful consideration, I have decided to resign from my position at NovaTech Industries, effective 2 weeks from today. This decision is final. I will complete all current projects within the notice period and ensure a smooth transition. Best regards, Dr. Marcus Chen. His finger hovered over the send button. 12 years. He'd given them 12 years. They'd taken his 20s and most of his 30s. They'd taken his time, his energy, his ideas, and they'd decided he was worth $35K less than they'd been paying him. He clicked send. Then he opened a new browser tab and searched for patent attorneys. Not the corporate firms that worked with big companies. Solo practitioners. Hungry ones. The kind who might work on contingency if the invention was promising enough. The third result was a woman named Sarah Okonkwo, specializing in intellectual property with a focus on protecting individual inventors against corporate overreach. Her website featured several case studies of inventors who'd been exploited by their employers. Her consultation was free. Marcus filled out the contact form, typing quickly before he could second-guess himself. He attached photos of his home prototype, his personal notes, receipts for the equipment he'd purchased, and a detailed explanation of how this invention was created outside of work without company resources. He hit submit at 3:47 a.m. His phone rang at 9:15 a.m. He'd fallen asleep at his desk and woke up disoriented, neck aching, drool on his keyboard. Is this Dr. Marcus Chen? A woman's voice, sharp and energetic. Yes? This is Sarah Okonkwo. I got your submission 4 hours ago. I haven't slept. Dr. Chen, if what you're showing me is real, if this actually works the way you're describing, you're not sitting on a patent. You're sitting on the invention of the decade, maybe the century. Can you come to my office today? Marcus looked at his resignation email, still sitting in his sent folder. Yes, he said. I can come today. Marcus Chen hadn't always been the kind of man who worked until 3 a.m. in his basement. Once, a lifetime ago, he'd been a kid who wanted to be an astronaut, staring up at the stars from the roof of his family's restaurant in Sacramento, dreaming of floating among them. His mother would call up to him, "Marcus, come help with dishes," and he'd climb down reluctantly, smelling of night air and possibility. His father had died when Marcus was 8, a construction accident that left his mother, Lily, to run their small Chinese restaurant alone. She'd worked 16-hour days, every day, no breaks, no vacations, to keep Marcus and Linda fed, clothed, and in good schools. She never complained. She just worked. Marcus had learned his work ethic from her, but he'd also learned something else, that hard work didn't always equal fair compensation. He'd seen his mother serve customers who spoke to her like she was stupid because of her accent, who left bad tips, who questioned the prices while wearing watches that cost more than her monthly revenue. She'd smile and bow and say, "Thank you, come again." And then she'd go to the kitchen and stand at the sink, hands gripping the edge, knuckles white. "You're going to be different," she'd told him once, during his sophomore year of high school, when he'd won the regional science fair with a project on photonic crystals. "You're going to use your brain, not your hands. You're going to work in an office where people respect you. You're going to make so much money, you'll never worry about rent or bills or whether the walk-in freezer is going to break down again." He'd believed her. He'd worked insanely hard, getting a full ride to Berkeley, then graduate scholarships to MIT for both his PhDs. He'd published papers that other scientists cited. He'd been recruited by NovaTech with promises of resources, collaboration, and the chance to work on cutting-edge projects that would change the world. The first few years had been good, exciting even. He'd had access to equipment he'd only dreamed of. His team was small but dedicated. Wei Zhang, who'd become his closest friend, and an older researcher named Patricia Hoffman, who'd mentored him on navigating corporate politics. Rule 1, Patricia had told him over coffee during his second week, never tell them your best ideas immediately. Make them think every breakthrough is a team effort. You'll get less credit, but you'll also get less scrutiny. He hadn't understood what she meant until she was fired 2 years later, right after successfully developing a new type of battery technology. NovaTech had patented it under the company name, gave her a $500 bonus, and then eliminated her position in a restructuring. She'd fought them in court and lost. The last Marcus heard, she was teaching high school chemistry in Oregon. After that, Marcus had become more careful. He documented everything. He kept detailed notes. He started working on side projects at home, just in case. He'd watched as NovaTech grew from a mid-sized tech company to a major player, going public, acquiring smaller firms, building a gleaming new headquarters with an infinity pool on the roof that only executives could access. The pay raises never kept pace with the company's growth. His salary had gone from $75K to $95K to $115K over 10 years, incremental bumps that were always described as generous, even though they barely kept pace with inflation. He'd asked for $150K 3 years ago after a particularly successful project that netted NovaTech a $200 million contract. He'd been told that his request was not aligned with our compensation philosophy. Then they'd hired Jennifer Carlson at $340K. Marcus had liked Jennifer at first. She was charismatic and seemed genuinely interested in the research, but over time, he'd noticed a pattern. She'd attend their team meetings, ask probing questions, and then present their ideas to the board as her own insights. She'd suggest strategic directions that were just reworded versions of proposals Marcus had submitted months earlier. When their metamaterial research started showing promise, she'd suddenly taken a keen personal interest, scheduling weekly check-ins and asking for detailed reports. The day Marcus had shown her the early prototype, the lab version, the incomplete one, her eyes had lit up. "This is it. This is our flagship product for the next decade. We need to accelerate the timeline. I want a full working model in 6 months." 6 months isn't realistic. We're still solving fundamental physics problems. This technology is 6 months, she repeated. The board is very excited. If we can demonstrate this at the Defense Technology Summit in March, we're looking at contracts worth potentially $1 billion or more. Make it happen. She'd walked out before he could respond. That was 8 months ago. Marcus had worked himself to exhaustion trying to meet her deadline. He'd canceled plans with Linda. He'd stopped dating after a promising relationship with a woman named Rachel fizzled because he kept missing their dates. He'd developed chronic insomnia and a dependency on coffee that bordered on addiction. And he'd failed to meet the deadline. The lab prototype worked, but it was limited. It could bend light, create optical camouflage, but it couldn't do what Marcus knew was possible. It couldn't achieve full spectrum invisibility. Jennifer had been furious. "I told the board this would be ready. I personally guaranteed it. Do you understand how this makes me look?" I understand the physics aren't cooperating with your PowerPoint presentation, Marcus had said, too tired to be diplomatic. Her expression had gone cold. Watch your tone. You work for me. Maybe if you spent less time on attitude and more time on results, we wouldn't be in this position. 2 weeks later, the pay cut email had arrived. Now, sitting in Sarah Okonkwo's office, Marcus told her everything. She listened without interrupting, taking notes on a legal pad, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Sarah was in her early 40s, with sharp features and an intensity that reminded Marcus of his mother. Her office was modest but organized, with walls covered in framed patents and case files. A photo on her desk showed her with 2 teenage kids, all 3 smiling at what looked like a graduation ceremony. "Okay," she said when he finished. "Let me make sure I understand. The invention you're claiming, the one that actually works, the breakthrough version, was created entirely at your home, using your personal equipment on your own time. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And NovaTech has a version in their lab, but it's incomplete. It's missing the crucial element that makes the technology actually viable." "Correct." "And you have documentation proving when and where you developed each version. Receipts, personal notes, maybe timestamps on files?" Marcus pulled out a folder. "Everything. I'm thorough." Sarah smiled. "I can see that. Dr. Chen, I'll be honest with you. This is going to be a fight. NovaTech will argue that even work done at home is covered by your employment contract. They'll claim that any knowledge you gained while working there contributed to this invention, therefore it's theirs. They'll drag this out, try to bankrupt you with legal fees, and make your life hell." Marcus's stomach sank. "So I should just let them have it?" "I didn't say that." Sarah leaned forward. "I said it's going to be a fight, but you have something most individual inventors don't. Meticulous documentation and a truly novel invention that was created outside their purview. More importantly, you have me. I work on contingency for cases like this. I get paid when you get paid. And Dr. Chen, if we win this, we won't just win. We'll win big." "How big?" "You said military and civilian applications worth billions. Let's say we patent this under your name, then license it. You keep controlling interest. With the right strategy, we're looking at you becoming a very wealthy man. But more than that, we're looking at you keeping control of your own invention. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not the money, the principle." Marcus thought about his mother, standing at that sink, gripping the edge. He thought about Patricia Hoffman, fired after giving NovaTech a fortune. He thought about Richard Pemberton's 3rd vacation home. "Yes," he said, "it's about the principle." "Then let's get started." Marcus's last 2 weeks at NovaTech were designed to be humiliating. Richard Pemberton had him moved from his private lab to a shared workspace in the building's basement, a cramped room with flickering lights and a persistent smell of mildew. His security clearance was downgraded, so he couldn't access his own research files. Jennifer Carlson stopped acknowledging him in the hallways.
"They're trying to make you quit early," Wei said, visiting him on his 3rd day in the basement. "They want you to lose your temper so they can fire you for cause and avoid paying severance." "I'm not quitting early," Marcus said, systematically backing up his personal files, the ones he was legally entitled to, his published papers, his theoretical notes that predated his employment. Everything else he left untouched. "I'm going to work these 2 weeks with a smile on my face, complete my transition documentation, and leave professionally." "You're a better man than me." "No, I'm a smarter man. Sarah says they'll look for any excuse to claim breach of contract. I'm not giving them one." On his final day, Marcus cleaned out his desk while his new replacement, Derek Walsh, the Stanford kid, watched nervously. "I'm sorry it went down like this," Derek said. "For what it's worth, everybody knows you got screwed." "Thanks," Marcus said, meaning it. Derek was just a kid, ambitious and naive, the same way Marcus had been 12 years ago. "My advice? Document everything. Keep copies of your work at home. And when they tell you that you're lucky to work here, remember that you're the one creating value. They're just managing it." Derek nodded, looking uncomfortable. Marcus walked out of NovaTech Industries at 5:47 p.m. on a Friday, carrying a single box of personal items. Wei met him in the parking lot, and they went to a bar near the waterfront, a dive place with good beer and better wings. "To freedom," Wei said, raising his glass. "To freedom," Marcus echoed, but he felt hollow. 12 years, gone. And now the real battle began. Sarah had filed the patent application under Marcus's name 3 days after his resignation, using an expedited process. The invention was classified as a metamaterial breakthrough, with applications in defense, communications, and medical technology. The claims were broad but defensible, covering not just the material itself, but the specific quantum alignment process that made it work. NovaTech's legal response came within a week, a cease and desist letter, followed by a lawsuit claiming that Marcus had stolen company property, violated his employment contract, and misappropriated trade secrets. They were suing for damages of $50 million and demanding the patent be transferred to them immediately. "This is standard intimidation," Sarah said, reading through the filing. "They're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. But look at their argument. It's all speculation. They're claiming the invention is theirs, but they can't prove it because they don't actually have the complete version. They have your lab prototype, which is nice but not revolutionary. They don't have the breakthrough. Can they force me to hand it over? Not if our documentation holds up. Discovery is going to be interesting. They'll have to show what they have, and we'll show when and where you developed what you have. The timeline is going to be crucial." The timeline was brutal. NovaTech had deep pockets and a platoon of corporate attorneys. They filed motion after motion, each one requiring Sarah to respond, each response costing time and energy. They demanded Marcus's personal computer, his notebooks, his financial records, his emails going back 5 years. They wanted to depose his sister, his friends, even his ex-girlfriend Rachel. Sarah fought back hard. She filed counterclaims for wrongful termination, discrimination, and unpaid overtime. Marcus had worked thousands of hours beyond his contract without compensation. She demanded NovaTech's internal communications about Marcus, including any discussions about his salary reduction. What came back in discovery was damning. An email from Richard Pemberton to Jennifer Carlson, dated 3 months before Marcus's pay cut. "Chen is getting too expensive and he knows too much. Let's lowball him on the adjustment. If he quits, we save money. If he stays, we save money. Either way, we have his metamaterial research. Wallace in legal says the contract is tight." Another email from Jennifer to Richard. "The metamaterial project is worth potentially $1 billion plus. Chen is the only one who fully understands it. Suggest we keep him at reduced salary until we can fully document his process, then transition him out. Bring in someone cheaper to implement." And the most damaging, from Richard to the board of directors, our aggressive cost reduction in R&D salaries will improve margins by 15% this quarter. The Chen adjustment alone saves $35K annually, and we expect at least 6 other researchers to accept similar cuts rather than face the job market. This demonstrates our commitment to shareholder value. Sarah printed out that last email and put it in a plastic frame on her desk. This is what we call a smoking gun. They weren't cutting your salary because you were overpaid. They were cutting it to boost quarterly margins while planning to steal your work and fire you anyway. Marcus read the emails over and over, feeling sick. He'd worked 60-hour weeks for these people. He'd missed his mother's last months because he'd been in the lab during visiting hours, trying to meet Jennifer's impossible deadlines. And they'd seen him as nothing but a line item to be optimized. The case went to mediation. A neutral third party, a retired judge named Harold Chen, no relation, listened to both sides present their arguments in a conference room that cost $500 an hour to rent. NovaTech's lead attorney, a man named Douglas Finch, who wore suits that cost more than Marcus's monthly rent, argued that every invention made by an employee in a technical field belonged to the employer regardless of where or when it was created. The knowledge that Dr. Chen used to develop this invention was gained through his employment at NovaTech. The foundational research was conducted in NovaTech facilities. The inspiration came from NovaTech projects. By any reasonable interpretation, this is NovaTech property. Sarah countered with timestamps, receipts, and Marcus's personal notebooks, all dated and documented. Dr. Chen's breakthrough came from his own insight, developed on his own time, using his own equipment. NovaTech has an incomplete prototype that doesn't work nearly as well. They're trying to claim ownership of an invention they couldn't create themselves, made by a man they were actively planning to exploit and discard. Judge Chen listened impassively, then asked Marcus a question directly. Dr. Chen, be honest with me. Did any knowledge you gained while working at NovaTech contribute to this invention? Marcus considered lying, but Sarah had coached him. Always tell the truth in mediation. Always. The judge can smell bullshit. Yes, Marcus said. I learned things at NovaTech that contributed to my understanding of metamaterials, but the specific breakthrough, the quantum alignment process, came from my own research pursued independently outside of work. It's like saying that because I learned calculus in college, the university owns any equation I write for the rest of my life. Judge Chen smiled slightly. That's a good analogy. The mediation ended without resolution. NovaTech refused to concede anything. Douglas Finch made one final offer. We'll give Dr. Chen $500,000 to walk away and assign the patent to us. That's more than generous considering his breach of contract. Counteroffer, Sarah said. NovaTech withdraws all claims, issues a public apology, and pays Dr. Chen $2 million in damages for wrongful termination and discrimination. Douglas Finch actually laughed. Not a chance. We'll see you in court. The trial began on a cold morning in February, nearly a year after Marcus had sent his resignation email. He'd spent that year in a strange limbo. No job, burning through his savings, doing consulting work where he could find it, while the lawsuit consumed his life. Linda had lent him money, Wei had lent him money. Sarah had deferred her fees, betting everything on a win. NovaTech, meanwhile, had announced a new invisibility technology at the Defense Summit, demonstrating the lab prototype Marcus had left behind. It had generated significant interest, enough for them to secure preliminary contracts worth $200 million. The technology didn't work nearly as well as Marcus's home version, but it worked well enough to be commercially viable. They had also promoted Jennifer Carlson to Chief Innovation Officer at $500K plus options. The courtroom was modern and austere, all blonde wood and glass. Judge Margaret Washington presided, a black woman in her 60s with a reputation for being brilliant and unemotional. Impatient with nonsense. The jury was 12 people from various backgrounds, most of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Sarah's opening statement was concise and devastating. She told Marcus's story in plain language. A brilliant researcher, exploited for years, paid below market value, targeted for a pay cut to boost corporate margins, and then victimized when he dared to invent something on his own time. She showed the jury the emails. She showed them Marcus's documentation. She made it simple. This is about a company that wanted to own not just Dr. Chen's work hours, but his entire mind, his every thought, everything he would ever create. Douglas Finch's opening was slick and corporate. He painted Marcus as a disgruntled employee who'd stolen valuable research and tried to profit from it. Dr. Chen worked at NovaTech for 12 years. He was paid over $1.3 million in total compensation during that time. He had access to cutting-edge equipment, brilliant colleagues, and resources that most researchers can only dream of. And how did he repay that investment? By sneaking research out the door and trying to patent it under his own name. The first witnesses were technical experts, both sides bringing in PhD holders to testify about the nature of the invention and when it could have been developed. NovaTech's expert, a professor from Caltech, argued that the home version was merely an optimization of the lab version, not a fundamentally different invention. Sarah's expert, a retired DARPA researcher named Dr. Helen Moss, demolished that argument.
The lab version and the home version are related the same way a bicycle and a motorcycle are related. Yes, they both have wheels, but the fundamental mechanism, the engine in this analogy, is completely different. The quantum alignment process that Dr. Chen developed is novel. I've never seen anything like it in the literature. This isn't an optimization. This is a paradigm shift. The jury, most of whom looked lost during the technical testimony, perked up at that. Then came the employment witnesses. Sarah called Patricia Hoffman, the researcher who'd been fired years earlier, who testified about NovaTech's pattern of exploiting inventors. She called 3 other former employees with similar stories of ideas stolen, credit denied, and retaliation when they pushed back. But the most powerful testimony came from Wei Zong. He'd still been working at NovaTech when the trial started, but he'd quit 2 weeks earlier, burning that bridge to testify for Marcus. "I worked with Marcus for 10 years, Wei said from the stand, his voice steady. "I watched him work longer hours than anyone else in the company. Nights, weekends, holidays. He missed his mother's funeral because Jennifer Carlson told him he needed to be in the lab for a critical test. And you know what? The test could have waited. It wasn't critical. But Marcus believed in the work. He believed in the mission. And they took advantage of that." Douglas Finch cross-examined aggressively. "Mr. Zong, isn't it true that you and Dr. Chen are friends, that you have a personal bias in his favor?" "Yes, we're friends, and yes, I'm biased. I'm biased toward the truth. You quit your job at NovaTech right before this trial. Convenient timing." "I quit because I was asked to testify against Marcus, and I refused. They told me I'd be fired if I didn't cooperate with their legal team, so I saved them the trouble." The courtroom stirred. Judge Washington sustained an objection from Sarah, but the damage was done. The jury had heard enough. Then Marcus took the stand. Sarah walked him through his entire history at NovaTech, the long hours, the promises of advancement that never materialized, the pay that never kept pace with his contributions. She had him explain the invention in simple terms, using demonstrations and visual aids. Marcus had brought a small sample of the material, and under controlled conditions, he showed the jury how it could bend light around an object, making it effectively invisible. The jury was riveted. Douglas Finch's cross-examination was brutal. He spent 2 days trying to trap Marcus in contradictions, suggesting he'd used company resources, implying he'd stolen ideas from colleagues, questioning every timestamp and receipt. Marcus stayed calm. Sarah had prepared him well. "The truth is simple," he said at one point, looking directly at the jury. "I had an idea at 3 in the morning, in my apartment, using equipment I bought with my own money. I developed it on my own time, and when my employer tried to cut my salary to boost their margins, I decided I was done giving them everything while they gave me nothing in return. This isn't about greed. It's about ownership. I own my own mind. They don't get to rent it for $95K a year and keep everything I create."
Forever. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. The verdict came back in Marcus's favor on every count. The patent was his. NovaTech had violated his contract by constructively terminating him through the pay cut. The court awarded him $8 million in damages, $2 million for lost wages and emotional distress, and $6 million in punitive damages for the company's willful misconduct. But the real victory was the patent. Marcus owned it outright. Every application, every license, every dollar it would ever generate, his. Richard Pemberton and Jennifer Carlson weren't in the courtroom for the verdict. They'd sent their lawyers. Outside on the courthouse steps, with cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions, Marcus made a brief statement. "I'm grateful for the jury's wisdom and the legal system's protection of individual rights. I hope this case sends a message to companies everywhere. Your employees are not your property. Their ideas are not your inventory. If you want loyalty and innovation, you have to give respect and fairness in return." Marcus Chen's story begins not with triumph, but with insult. A $35,000 pay cut designed to push him out the door while keeping his groundbreaking work behind. As a researcher at NovaTech Industries, Marcus had spent years developing revolutionary metamaterial technology with applications in defense, medicine, and consumer electronics. But when he asked for fair compensation, the company responded with calculated cruelty: slash his salary, keep his inventions, and bet he'd be too afraid to fight back. They were wrong. Marcus was the son of an immigrant. His mother Lily had worked brutal hours in a restaurant, sacrificing everything so her children could have better lives. She taught him that hard work mattered, but so did dignity. When NovaTech tried to steal both, something inside Marcus snapped. He'd developed the core breakthrough at home, on his own time, using his own resources. The company knew this, but claimed ownership anyway, citing broad employment contracts that essentially declared every thought in an employee's head to be company property. It was legal exploitation, the kind that happens thousands of times across the tech industry. But Marcus decided enough was enough. With his sister Linda's help, Marcus found Sarah Morrison, an attorney willing to take on a David versus Goliath patent fight. They gathered evidence: notebooks documenting his home experimentation, credit card receipts for materials he'd purchased himself, and testimony from his colleague Wei about the timeline of development. The legal battle was brutal. NovaTech had unlimited resources and a scorched earth strategy. They filed motion after motion, trying to bury Marcus in legal fees and exhaustion. They offered settlements designed to make him go away quietly. When he refused, they made it personal, digging into his life, questioning his character, painting him as a disgruntled employee rather than an exploited inventor. But Marcus had something NovaTech didn't: the truth, meticulously documented. The courtroom battle became a referendum on how America treats its innovators. Sarah masterfully demonstrated that Marcus had conceived and developed the technology independently, that NovaTech knew this, and that they tried to claim it anyway through intimidation and contractual overreach. The company's own arrogance became their undoing. Internal emails revealed executives laughing about how they'd acquired Marcus's invention for the cost of his salary. Richard Pemberton, NovaTech CEO, was exposed on the stand as a man who saw employees as resources to be exploited rather than partners to be valued. The jury awarded Marcus $50 million in damages and, more importantly, full ownership of his patent.
Winning the case was just the beginning. NovaTech launched a PR campaign to destroy Marcus's reputation, using anonymous sources to paint him as unstable and unethical. But Marcus had learned something crucial: you can't defend your value by hiding from the fight. He founded Quantum Shield Technologies, bringing together his sister Linda, his friend Wei, his attorney Sarah, and others who believed that innovation should benefit innovators. Within 8 months, they'd secured $150 million in licensing deals. Within 2 years, they'd surpassed NovaTech entirely. Meanwhile, investigative journalist Amanda Torres exposed NovaTech's systematic exploitation of researchers. The article went viral. Pension funds divested. The SEC investigated. A class action lawsuit followed. NovaTech's market cap dropped $750 million in 2 weeks. The empire built on exploitation crumpled. But Marcus's real revolution wasn't financial, it was cultural. At Quantum Shield, he implemented policies the industry said were impossible. Employees owned their inventions, licensing them to the company in exchange for equity and royalties. Fair wages, transparent promotions, treating people as partners, not assets. Other CEOs said he was naive. Venture capitalists warned he'd never maximize shareholder value. Marcus didn't care. He'd learned that companies built on fairness last longer than companies built on fear. The results proved him right. Quantum Shield grew to 85 employees and $400 million in annual revenue. More importantly, they created a model that other companies began studying, proof that ethical treatment and business success weren't mutually exclusive.
Marcus's story inspired a movement. Researchers across the country began standing up to exploitation. Some filed their own lawsuits. Others simply refused to sign away their dignity. The conversation shifted from, "This is how things are," to, "This is how things could be." Marcus testified before Congress. The legislation that passed, informally called the Chen Amendment, clarified that inventions created outside work hours, without company resources, belonged to employees. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. 5 years after the verdict, Richard Pemberton's golden parachute was clawed back in shareholder lawsuits. The company that had seemed invincible was dismantled and sold for parts. 10 years after that fateful pay cut, Quantum Shield went public at an $8 billion valuation. Marcus stood on the New York Stock Exchange floor with his team, watching confetti fall and cameras flash. But the numbers weren't what mattered most. What mattered was the culture they'd built, the researchers they'd mentored, the free licenses they provided to universities worldwide, the proof that dignity and success could coexist. Standing at his mother's grave years earlier, Marcus had promised her something, that he wouldn't let them break him, that he'd remember what she'd taught him about the non-negotiable nature of dignity. He'd kept that promise, and in doing so, he'd created a blueprint for others to follow. Marcus Chen didn't just cost NovaTech $750 million. He proved that the most revolutionary invention is sometimes simply refusing to be undervalued. He demonstrated that fighting back is possible, that fairness can be profitable, and that one person's courage can change an entire industry's conversation about what workers deserve. His story is a reminder that your value isn't determined by what someone is willing to pay you. It's determined by what you're willing to fight for when they try to pay you less than you're worth. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to Quantum Shield Stories, where silence is never forgotten. Join us for more tales of courage, innovation, and the fight for dignity in the modern workplace.